All right. So again, the idea is, you'd like to get to moksha and you want to reduce your karma. Well, wait a minute. Why do you want to reduce the karma? I thought you wanted to have more good karma and less bad karma. So think about it this way. Good karma leads to a reduction in karma, and bad karma leads to more karma and more drama. So good karma is the way you smooth everything out. Okay? So a good metaphor is you go to a pond and you start throwing rocks in it. And what happens to the water? It starts rippling, right? You throw more rocks in it. The first ripples interact with the second ripples, and now it all becomes choppy and it's moving around and doing stuff, right? Throwing more rocks, it becomes more and more, choppy, moving around, it becomes muddy and it's unclear. The stuff from the bottom gets churned up, can't see anything. Throwing the rocks in the pond is like bad karma. If I go to that pond and it's all choppy, and say I put some oil on the water, that oil starts to smooth out the ripples, right? And so the good karma is like going and putting oil in the water. It's like smooths things out. And eventually I don't need to put any more oil on because things smooth out and then it calms down. And then the water becomes clear, and then that's good karma. Okay? So the good karma can reduce the karma down. Okay? So doing good things reduces the drama. So in Hinduism, the way you do this, and when you reduce the karma, then you can achieve moksha. And the way you do this is through these are the main ways, not the only ones, but the main ones. Meditation. Lots of different types of meditation in Hinduism. We're not going to go into all these because it would take forever to talk about these things, but meditation. Okay? And meditation could also include yoga, include physical postures, include mental things, it can include all sorts of different kinds of worship, different kinds of techniques of meditation. Ritual communion. This is where you get together with other people and you do something as a ritual together. Usually a lot of times this can be singing. So this is called satsang, chanting the names of God together, things like this. Also can include things like kirtan. You may have heard of kirtan or bhajan. Those of you guys who do yoga. Kirtan is this sort of call and response singing. I went to a kirtan thing the other week. It was really great. And you chant mantras, which are the holy names of God. And then what you do is then you call and respond. The leader will chant these things, and then you'll call and respond. It's all put to music, and it's a really great experience. And so that can be part of this ritual communion thing. Other one is worship, which is puja. Puja are specific ceremonies or rituals that are followed, and they're usually fairly precise, and they have interesting elements to them that are fairly fixed. Okay? So worship or puja. Renunciation. This is usually done later in life. Traditionally, this was done by men. Once you live your life as a householder and you had your kids and you had your job and then you retire, you would renounce material life and you would devote yourself to spiritual beliefs. Traditionally, the woman would support the man doing this. Okay? The man would go off in the woods and meditate all day, and the woman would basically bring in lunch and support him. Right. Nowadays, in more modern times, of course, women can also become renunciates, which is known as sunnyasin in later life. Okay, sunnyasin. This is where you say, "Yeah, I'm done with my job, retire. I'm going to go live in the ashram. Ashram is the place of worship. I'm going to go live in the ashram and I'm going to just meditate." Okay? And the last one is probably one of the most common is bhakti or devotion. And devotion or bhakti takes on many different forms, but basically this is going to the temple and showing devotion to the gods. So when we go to the Hindu temple, you go there and you see, Vishnu, and you pray to Vishnu at the temple, and you make a little circumambulation around the temple, and you pray to each of the gods. You show your devotion to them. You do darshan with them, which is an offering of the gods, or you gaze upon them. This is bhakti. Okay, so this is also very, very common. So these are the main things that Hindus do to practice. Okay, not the only things. There's other things too, but these are the main ones. 5 obligations of Hindus. Again, I don't like the word obligation in context of Hinduism. I would kind of say there's sort of 5 suggestions for Hindus, personally. One is worship, and this can be daily worship, bhakti, in the family shrine room. It can be also puja. Could also be practicing yoga in some sort of way, or religious study, reading, whatever it might be. Could be wearing traditional dress, whatever it might be. Okay? Holy days. Utsava, participation in festivals and holy days. And if you go to India, you will find that the Indian people, Hindu people, like lots of festivals. They love having festivals all the time. These are big public things, and there's music playing, and people are parading around. They'll make a a float with a god or a goddess on it, and they'll parade around town, and they'll do stuff, and they're really fun. And there's lots of these. So you'll celebrate these things, and you can do this in the home, in the temple, and in a social way with the community. Virtuous living, Dharma, live by the rules. Dharma means the religious rules, and this is living a life of good duty and conduct, learning to be selfless, thinking of others first, being respectful of parents, elders, swamis, which is another word for guru, following the rules, the divine law. This means ahimsa, non-injury to beings, and working on resolving your karmas. Pilgrimage, tirtha-yatra. Did I say that right? Tirtha-yatra. Taking pilgrimage at least once a year for the darshana of holy persons. In other words, the gazing upon holy persons, either a guru or a representation of a god, and traveling to see that. These can be nearby or they can be far. So every year in this class, I consider what we do. We go to the temple. For me, this is a little bit of a pilgrimage. I make this pilgrimage every year. I go to the Hindu temple. I set everything right with Shiva and Vishnu. Make sure that they're cool with everything with my students, with me teaching this class. So far so good. Shiva hasn't opened his third eye and laser beamed me yet and vaporized me, which he's known to do sometimes if he's pissed off. So far that's good. So I consider this a tirtha-yatra, if I can say that properly. Okay, but you might go to India, you might go to a certain holy place, and again, the idea that you would take a pilgrimage to these places is part of something that a lot of Hindus do. And then rites of passage or samskara. This is observing the many sacraments that mark and sanctify passages throughout life, and Hindus have a lot of these. Celebrating birth, name giving, head shaving, first feeding, ear piercing, first learning, coming of age, marriage, and death. And I don't know if some of you have ever been to a Hindu wedding. It takes 3 days. It's a big ritual, big giant thing. And so again, these are practiced by Hindus, right? So you mark these periods in life. Now, Vedas and Dharma. Vedas are sacred texts that are revealed to enlightened sages. The texts are very likely originally oral traditions, and the written texts, especially early on, were probably unlocked by oral instructions. In other words, you could read the text, but you wouldn't get it until somebody told you what the meaning was. This is also by the way, very common in China. These are divinely inspired, but they're created by humans. They're mostly written in Sanskrit, which is the ancient Indian language. There are a few of these Vedas in Tamil, which is another language. The word Veda, the word Veda literally means knowledge, and it's from the Sanskrit root vid, which is to know, which is the same, which also, by the way, a lot of these Sanskrit words work their way into Latin, and so then they come into our language. It's very interesting. And so we know this from the Latin root of video, right, which is to know from a vision, to see something, to know something from seeing. Okay? Now these Vedas, again, there's different variations on the dates, but the one I had was between 1500 and 900 BCE. But again, they probably existed much earlier, either as partially written forms or as oral forms. There are 4 Vedas. The Rig Veda is the oldest, and this consists of 1,028 sacred hymns to accompany the sacrifices to many gods. And again, back in the day, they had lots of sacrifices. Okay. The Sama Veda is another one. These are verses arranged for ritual purposes. The Yajur Veda, these are sacrificial formula. And the Atharva Veda, which are magical spells. Additional Vedic scriptures are the Brahmanas, which are theological treatises dealing with the details and symbolic significance of Vedic ritual. Each Veda has supplemental texts, and these supplemental texts are also very important. The Brahmanas These give detailed explanations and rules for the rituals. The Brahmana attached to each different Veda is relevant to different functions or roles of the Brahmin priests. And we'll talk about the priest class. Okay, this is the highest class in India. The Aranyakas, the forest books of esoteric learning, which form a bridge from ritualism to meditative practice. The Upanishads, which are speculative philosophical texts. And these supplements of the Vedas were probably composed between 700 and 300 BCE. We also have the Puranas. These are literally tales of the old days. And these are popular tales of stories about the gods, including their origins, peoples, and epic heroes that date from about 300 to 1,000 in the Common Era. And these are what we know in the West sort of as myths, mythological stories. They also include the Dharma, the moral code or laws, codes of conduct and behavior, which also includes the legitimization of a hierarchical social order, which we know as a caste system. And in Sanskrit, this is called Varna, the Varna. And there's a caste system. Traditionally in India, there's a caste system. Yes?
I'm pretty sure there still is a caste system, though it's not really talked about.
I'll talk about that.
Also, I think there's also now a thing called an outcast.
I'll talk about that. We're going to get there. We're almost there. But traditionally, there's a caste system. It consists of Brahmins, who are the priests, the Kshatriyas, who are the warriors and the rulers, the Vaishya, the merchants, the Shudras, the farmers, craftsmen, and manual laborers, and later on we have the Harijans, who are the outsiders or the untouchables. Now, the caste system is very interesting because this is something that is traditional in Hindu society, and there's some interesting things about it. One is that if you're born into a caste system, then that is essentially where you are. So if your parents are your parents are merchants, you're born, guess what job you're going to have when you grow up? You're going to be a merchant too. There's very little mobility between castes, and the castes have to do with certain jobs. Now, there's lots and lots of subcastes of these things. When we go to the temple, I will tell you about the people who built the temple, who belong to a caste of craftsmen. So they would be in the category of the Shudras, but they have a very specific caste of temple builders. But their families build the temples, and that caste, those families have been around for thousands of years because they stayed. If your dad was a temple builder, that's what you're going to be. Okay? So the good thing about that is that, well, all that temple building knowledge gets maintained. Okay? There's a caste of temple builders. You always have somebody who can build your temple. It's like, I don't want to be a temple builder like that. I'm going to go be a doctor. Well, pretty soon everybody wants to go be a doctor, and there's nobody building temples anymore. And so the idea that these castes keep people in these classes actually creates a lot of stability in society. And again, what you will hear among Hindus arguing for the caste system is that the caste system creates stability in society. It also creates psychological stability because you don't have to worry about your future. You know what you're going to be doing. You don't have to I could do anything, and then you get confused and overwhelmed. Well, that doesn't happen. You're a Brahmin, you're born into a Brahmin family. You're going to be a Brahmin priest. That's going to be your job. You're born as a Kshatriya. You're going to be a warrior, a soldier, or a ruler. That's your job. So you don't have to worry. Right? So the idea that it creates a stability, even psychologically. Now, the bad thing about it is, you can imagine how this would work. This becomes a very convenient way to keep people in their place. I know you would like to make a lot of money and be rich, but you're really in this lower caste, so I'm sorry, in this lifetime you just gotta you're gonna hang out there. Maybe if you're really good in this life, your next life you can get a promotion, right? Be born into a better caste. But in this life, I'm sorry, this is what you're gonna be born into. And this keeps people in their place, and it allows the ruling people, the elite, the ruling elite, to keep people in their place. Okay? Now, are the Indians the only ones who have a caste system in the world? Well, they're the only ones who have this one, right? But there's plenty of caste systems, right? So the other caste system that we know about is socioeconomic. Okay? It has to do with money or race. These are other ones that are very quite common. Okay? Now we find in the Indian caste system that the people at the top tend to believe in sky gods, and they tend to be lighter in color and probably are descended from more of the Aryan people who came into the Indian subculture, and the people in the lower caste tend to be darker and tend to represent more Dravidian people, who were the original inhabitants of the Indian subculture. So is there some racial tinge to this? Yes. It's not absolute, but yes, there is. Do we have a caste system, or have we had caste systems in this country where certain people, certain races have a harder time than other people? Yes. Okay. Do we have a caste system based on your immigration status? That's been a big thing in this country right now that where people are debating. You know? So lots of cultures have these kind of caste systems. So I don't want to seem like I'm picking on India, but this is the one specific to India. Yes.
Do you mean darker as in they?
Darker colored skin.
Okay.
We'll put it bluntly. Okay? Darker colored skin. And Southerners tend to be darker colored because they live near the equator. It's hotter. They need more melanin in their body to deal with the sunlight. So again, we see this north-south split, right? Again, we have the same kinds of things in the West, okay? But this is the way that the Indians systematized this, okay? And this again, when the British came, you know, very easy for the British to adopt this and work themselves up near the top, at the top, right? And then to maintain their hegemony over Indian people, right? Now, the modern Indian government theoretically has seen the error of their ways, and they have, at least on paper, abolished the caste system. So you can be born into a Shudra family of a farmer, and you can go get an education, and you can achieve a high government position. Now, in the past, only been reserved for Kshatriya, right? And that happens now. But, you know, things like this are hard to get rid of. You can't just legislate it out of existence and expect people not to still at least be thinking along these lines. So the caste system still functions in people's minds. You know, it's just like people who are racist here, right? You can say we don't allow racism, but people can still be racist, right? And so what happens is it takes education, it takes time for this kind of thing, this kind of hierarchy to sort of fade away. And the Indian government is making, as far as I know, is making an effort for this now. Okay. Yes?
Was this at all reflective of where people were in their like karmic cycle of life? Like if
That's
you
the
were
justification
born in
for it. So, you know, I'm sorry, you know, you're in the street sweeper, the untouchable caste. By the way, the untouchables do all the jobs that are considered to be dirty, right? So butchering animals, burying people, sweeping the crap off the street, that's in the untouchable class. And so you would never associate with those people because, you know, they're tainted, right? There's all this idea of purity comes into this too, right? Purity comes into this. So they're impure. So you can't go near them because their impurity will rub off on you, right? That's it. And this is also maintained, yes, by the, you know, the social class, these kinds of things. It's very important. Okay? So you're stuck in these. You know, your dad was a street sweeper, untouchable, you're going to be a street sweeper.
I mean, that kind of seems inconsistent with creating good karma for yourself if you like.
No, because the karma, because something you did bad in the past, you know, you got something wrong, you did something bad in the past, so this is how you work off your karma by being a street sweeper. And your idea is if you just follow your duty and you do your job as a street sweeper and you clean up the crap off the street and you live a good life, then now, you know, your karma's gotten better, so now, you know, next life, you have a chance, next life or the life after that, how many it takes, you have a chance now to move up. So you just have to accept your position and just do your duty and don't cause trouble. Can you see the problem in that?
Yeah.
Right? Because that allows me to like exploit you and whatever else, right? So I think in modern thinking, you know, yeah, we don't like this so much. But this was a way, I mean, the good part about it is it did lend some stability to society. But obviously, this really opens up the door for exploitation. Now, you could make a counter argument. Well, if I exploit you too much, then my karma's going to get bad. Then I might be born as a street sweeper. You know, well, that's the next life. I'm not going to worry about that. You know. So again, this can foment lots of exploitation. So our modern way of thinking, we don't like this so much. And again, the modern Indian government has said, no, we're a democracy. People get a vote. You know, this is inconsistent with a democratic society. Democratic society, one of the things is that we're all equal, right? Theoretically, here in America, we're all equal. We all have a vote. We're all equal, right? It's not just the landowners or the Brahmins who get to vote. okay, everybody gets a vote, right? It doesn't matter if your job is you work at In-N-Out Burgers, flipping burgers, or you work down in the morgue, embalming dead bodies, or you're the president of the university here, you get one vote. Dick Rush does not get 5 votes when he goes to vote for president. He gets 1. You get 1 vote, right? We're equal. Now we have different money, whatever else, but some level, fundamental level, we're equal. So this is sort of at odds with a democracy. And so the Indian government, being a democracy and being very proud of being a democracy, has now been trying to address this. Yes?
This might be kind of a tangent, but speaking about theoretically how we're all equal, and the fact that some states are bringing back voter ID laws, is this kind of like a shift backwards in a sense towards like legalizing a caste system?
I don't know. I mean, the problem is, it's easy to point the fingers at India and say, you've got this caste system, aren't you backward? But, certainly in America we have, at least not as systematized, but, we have caste systems. Sure we do, I mean, anybody who's, we know who's on the top, we know who's on the bottom, there's a lot of racial tinge to it, there's a socioeconomic tinge to it. I mean, we have it here, it's just not as systematized. Okay? And I would say, in my opinion, it's just as equally at odds with being in a democratic society as it is in India. Okay? Yes?
I was wondering, did the caste system start before writing?
Very early, very
So,
early. No,
it could have
back in the
been-
Harappan civilization, by the way, I should have mentioned this. Back in that early Harappan civilization, they had a form of writing. It was like pictograph writing. Like you see in Egypt and
Yeah.
places like this. It's pictograph. I mean, they had a system of writing. No, as far as I know, that has not been deciphered, even though they have lots of examples of it. Nobody's deciphered it yet. That's at least the last thing I read. So, they had writing, so people were able to write things down. And there's some evidence that this caste system may have been, maybe go way, way, way back. So this isn't a new invention, the caste system. The new thing is to try to get rid of it.
So the higher caste systems would be doing the writing, not the lower?
We don't know back in the day. Certainly in more modern times, yeah, the lower caste systems would have been illiterate, that they wouldn't have been doing the writing. Nowadays, of course, in India, they have education and people can become educated. People in India are fairly literate. It's one of the most literate places, especially considering how many poor people they have. But they have public education, and you can be a low caste and you get to go to school.
So the caste systems would be useful for passing down knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, that way it's good.
Like
Yeah, that way it's good, You're a merchant, you know how to be a good merchant, that gets passed on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so I'll move on. I'm not going to dwell on the caste system too much. Some scholars say that belief in the Vedas is a central characteristic of being Hindu. In other words, if you believe in the authority of the Vedas, then you're a Hindu. Other scholars say, nope, doesn't matter. And Buddhism is a good example, because if you're a Buddhist, Buddhism is a spin-off religion. It's a reform of Hinduism. Buddhists do not recognize the authority of the Vedas. Okay, the Vedas don't really mean much to Buddhists, and so some Hindus would say, well, Buddhists are not Hindus, right? Because they don't follow the Vedas. Other Hindus would say, no, that's ridiculous. We think of Buddha as basically an incarnation of Vishnu, and so because you worship Buddha, you believe in Buddhism, all you're doing is just basically following Vishnu, and so therefore you're a Hindu. I don't care what you think about the Vedas, it doesn't matter. Okay? So it just depends. Okay? It just depends. I say again, the Hindus I've talked to about it, I've asked this question to a couple people, and I've said, well, I'm a Buddhist, so does that make me Hindu? And some people will say, no, and some people say, yeah, if you want to be, those are the answers I've got. Okay? I think it really just depends. It's tougher when, for me personally, because I identify as Tibetan Buddhist. Tibetan Buddhism borrows a lot of stuff from Hinduism. And so being Tibetan Buddhist, it's a little tougher. Because I can show devotion to Lord Ganesh, who's the son of Shiva, because Ganesh is also in the Tibetan Buddhist monopoly. Tara, who we'll talk about as a version of Kali, is also in the Tibetan Buddhist thing. So I can do puja for those deities. Buddhist puja, but, again, but they're also Hindu gods and goddesses. So does that make me sort of kind of a sub-Hindu or a kind of a Hindu? I don't know. It's getting a little confusing. But the thing is, I think most Buddhists and most Hindus would tell you, don't dwell on that. It's not really important. Okay? It's really important. Okay. Dharma. Dharma are the rules, codes of conduct, etc., etc., etc. These are revealed by the Vedas. And this is as close to the Western idea of religion as Hinduism comes. It includes ideas of duty, truth, ethics, law, natural law, these kind of things are what was represented in Dharma. And Dharma in Hinduism is more related to behavior than beliefs. Okay? People are judged by their actions. You're judged by what you do, not by what you say. Okay? What a Hindu can and cannot do has traditionally been determined by caste, gender, etc. Ideas of purity and pollution come into play. Behavior reflects power structures which take precedent over beliefs. Okay? So again, it's not so much what you say you believe, but it's what you actually do. What do you manifest in your life? Doesn't matter what your caste is. You can be low caste and manifest proper behavior. Okay? Also a little tinge of this of you better do what's right for your caste. You better not rock the boat. Try to overstep what you were born into. Okay? There's a little bit of that in here as well. Whether or not a Hindu is a theist, pantheist, atheist, communist, existentialist, etc., makes no difference. What makes you Hindu is the practice, the actual behavior of rituals and the rules they adhere to. So again, if you don't really believe that Shiva is real, but you go to do your puja and you do your stuff and you follow through with everything and you try to live according to the rules, you can be a perfectly good Hindu. It's more what you do. In other words, if I say, I'm a good person, I believe in Shiva, Lord Shiva, I believe in you, but then I go out, and I do bad things, I hurt other people, then I'm not really a good Hindu. Okay? Yes?
So, is Hinduism really big on gender roles?
Yes. As are most traditional religions, by the way. Yes, there are very specific gender roles in traditional Hinduism, traditional Hindu society, yes. That's not to say that women cannot exercise a lot of influence in society and free will. You got to remember that India has had a woman prime minister, ruler of the country, and the United States has not. So again, but there are specific roles for women. There are traditional roles that women play. Okay? And again, modern India, we've seen women be able to step outside those roles. Okay? By the way, this is also true of Islamic countries like Pakistan, which had a woman prime minister. Okay? Haven't got there yet in this country. So again, you want to look at these countries and go, they're backwards and they're like, they treat women like crap or whatever. No, not necessarily. In some ways, they're way ahead of us. Okay? Now, we'll talking about the Hindu gods. It's important because this will help you for going to the temple. There's the Hindu Trinity. Trinity of gods, and each god has their consort, their wife, consort, however you want to think of it. And there's three of these. So the three main Hindu gods, Brahma, the guy on the top, Vishnu, this guy with the fidget spinner. Actually, that's not really, that's actually a weapon, a discus weapon. They had all sorts of really cool, weird weapons back in ancient India. And this guy, Shiva. These are the three main gods. And they each have their goddess wives. So Brahma's wife is Saraswati. Vishnu's wife is Lakshmi. And Shiva's wife is Parvati. And in some instances, one thing you see is that the wives actually, in some way, are more active than the guys, especially in two of the cases. So let's talk about these gods. By the way, we also talk about Shiva's kids. Shiva had two sons. One is Kartikeya, who's the god of war, who I almost never talk about. He's around, but there's not much going on with him. But the other one is Ganesha. And Ganesha is hugely popular. Hugely popular. So he is known as the god of knowledge and also the remover of obstacles. So Ganesha is very, very important in Hindu life. A lot of people worship Ganesh, and there's lots of temples to Ganesh. Okay. But he's usually related to Shiva. So when you go to the temple, you'll see the Ganesh statues are downstairs in the Shiva temple. Yes?
Didn't Ganesh just somebody often get his head knocked off?
I will tell you the story of Ganesh. Just hold on. We'll get to that. Well, I could tell it to you now. So Ganesh, this is a great Freudian story, by the way. So put your Freudian thinking cap on and tell me what Freudian principle is at play in the story of Ganesh. So the story goes that Parvati and Shiva are living together, and one day Shiva goes off in the forest to meditate. So Shiva likes to do this, likes to go off and meditate. He goes off to the forest to meditate and leaves Parvati back at the house. He comes back to the house and looks inside, and there's his wife Parvati, and a full-grown man is in there, and she is holding this full-grown man and hugging him and kissing him. And Shiva is not a guy to be taken lightly. He did not want to piss him off. So he immediately gets enraged. My wife's cheating on me with this guy. That's it for this guy. Takes a sword, lops off his head. Parvati is freaking out. What's going on here? And she looks at him, she goes, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And he's like, "What are you talking about? You're here making love to another man." She goes, "That's not another man. That's your son. You've been out meditating in the forest for 20 years. You lost track of time like you always do. And you realize 20 years have passed. And I had a baby, and it's your son, and you just lopped his head off." And she was like, "Oh my God, what did I do? I lopped off the head of my own son. Like, this is terrible. Oh, geez." At that moment, an elephant happens to be passing by outside. Poor unfortunate elephant. And so Shiva goes and takes the head off the elephant, puts it on the body of his son, and that's where Ganesh gets his elephant head. Okay.
You should have taken the head and put it on the elephant.
You know, whatever. Yes.
Is that any way tied into the story of when he's saving the elephant from the alligator, Ganesh? Because maybe he's like...
He has a connection to elephants.
elephants
Yeah,
and
yeah. Think about this in a Freudian way. What is this typical Freudian thing?
Oedipus?
Oedipal complex. This is exactly what's going on. And the head of an elephant kind of reminds you of what? Right? And what does Freud say the
We
little
know what
boy's
doesn't
greatest
remind
fear is? Being castrated by the father, right? So this is a really Oedipal story. It's great. I mean, this is like thousands of years before Freud ever came around and thought of this stuff up. People were thinking this stuff up. You know, so it is an Oedipal story, right? And it has a resolution.
Oh, the trunk? Is that what you're saying?
Now you get it. Now you get it. Good, good, good. It took a little minute, but you got it. That's good. Yes.
Can we talk about Ganesh and its relation to the Pakistani god of calamity?
No, I'm not going to talk about that. I don't want to get too far because it's going to be confusing to people already. Okay. So Ganesh is very important. It's the remover of obstacles. So things are not going well. You know, your life, you just seem like stuck. Whatever's supposed to happen is not happening. You go to Ganesh and you say, "Ganesh, Lord Ganesh, help me," and he removes the obstacles. Elephants also thought to be very smart animals. You may know this. Elephants are very intelligent. So again, he's also one of the gods of knowledge, intelligence, Ganesh. So he's a really good one. So I started with Ganesh. Now I want to get back to the main ones. So, all right. So let's talk about Brahma first. This is Brahma. He's depicted with many heads. He's a very interesting Hindu god because he basically, opens his eyes and, time and creation starts, our existence starts. When he closes his eyes, he goes back to sleep, so it represents a kalpa, all these kind of things. But he is not widely worshipped in India. In fact, the last thing I read, there was only like 4 Brahma temples in all of India. Not many Brahma temples. So he's one of the great Hindu Trinity, but people don't pay much attention to him. And there's a story that why this may be. And the story goes like this, that one day Brahma is cruising around and he, do I have it in here? I don't have it in here. Oh darn, I should have put this in here. All right, I gotta put that in for next time. He's cruising around and he sees his daughter cavorting around and he falls in love with her and he comes down to earth and he has sex with his own daughter. And from that, one of the creation myths is that that's where all the people come from. And because of this incest, he is ostracized by the other gods. They see this as incredibly bad, sinful thing, and this is terrible, so they ostracize him, and they say, he's got to be punished for this. And so they choose, Shiva's the guy you go to for these kind of things. They choose Shiva to punish him, and Shiva goes to Brahma. Brahma has all these different heads, and Shiva cuts off one of his heads as punishment. And because of this, theoretically, that this is one of the reasons why Brahma is not so much popular, people don't worship him very much. Now, on the surface of it, the story sounds sort of horrendous, but symbolically the story is very interesting, because symbolically what the story means is that Brahma, as divinity, as spirit, comes down and unites with materialism, material earthly presence that his daughter represents. And between those two things, that's where human beings come from. So human beings are born of the earth. They have an earthly body, but they have a spark of divinity from the father Brahma, right? So again, if you want to think about it metaphorically, this is what the story means. And the human beings, we carry the spark of divinity, and then our job is to get back to that divinity, even though we exist in this physical body. But we have this divine spark, and the idea is to get back to that divine spark. But Brahma ain't much studied. People don't worship him too much. He's not really on the radar. And again, there's all sorts of stories. You can read these things about him. The most interesting one is you have Vishnu reclining here, and a navel, a lotus comes out of his navel, and on top of the lotus sits Brahma. And when Brahma opens up his eyes, then the world comes into existence, and when Brahma closes his eyes, the world goes back into existence. You'll sometimes see these statues like this. Vishnu. Vishnu is thought to be the maintainer. So Brahma is the creator. Vishnu is the maintainer. So Vishnu is the guy who keeps things going. He keeps the world going. He maintains things. He's the go-to guy for that. He's the guy who represents roles in society, sort of the way you should live, these kind of things. Okay? So Vishnu is the maintainer. Vishnu is very, very important. A lot of Vishnu temples. Again, we're going to go down to Calabasas there, and we're going to see the main temple is the Vishnu temple. Vishnu has lots of emanations. Okay, emanations are incarnations. Okay? The two most important ones are Rama and Krishna. The two important emanations of Vishnu. Okay? And these are where Vishnu takes on human form and comes down and lives among human beings. Still has his divinity, but he comes down and lives among human beings and demonstrates how you live your life. Okay? How you, and again, he's the maintainer of this world. So he's the guy who sort of keeps things going. Okay? And so he comes in human form and shows you the role model for these things. Okay? And his wife is Lakshmi, who represents Shakti, female energy, also sometimes called Shakti. And she represents, again, the sort of perfect wife. And so we're going to talk about her in a minute. Okay? Now I'll talk about Shiva. Shiva, while Vishnu is the maintainer, Shiva is the destroyer. He is the one who gets rid of everything so that everything can come back again. Okay? So you've got to destroy things. If we didn't destroy things, then what would happen would be everything would be around forever and things would get really messy and it would be a problem. So what Shiva does is sweeps out the old so the new can come up. Okay? So Shiva is the destroyer. Okay? Shiva is also the god of meditation. He likes to meditate. It's his main joy in life, and woe be to you if you interrupt him during his meditation. That third eye will open up, and like a disintegration ray will come out and vaporize you. You don't want to piss him off. You don't wake him up from meditation. He is depicted sort of in this blue color, ashy color, because the blue is sort of the color of the infinite. It's also this darker blue is also the color of passion. He's got a lot of passion. And he's covered in funeral ashes, which demonstrate the mortality, okay, of the world. That everything that is living, that is existing, is going to someday come to an end. Okay? He's associated with these cobras, which are protective. And the other thing you see in him is this trident thing, this three-pronged stick. Right? It's also related to Shiva. Anytime you see that three-pronged thing in Indian context, that means it's Shiva. Okay? Where else do you see this three-pronged thing? Poseidon. Right? So again, there may be some influence on the ancient Greeks. We don't really know. It's possible. Also, this thing here, this little drum, this is a damaru. And this is something that Shiva, when he's shown in his form, is Shiva Nataranja, which is Shiva, the dancing Shiva, like this. He's holding this little drum and he's beating it. It's a little drum that's got two heads that face out, and there's a little ball on a string, and as you flip it back and forth, the ball goes boom, boom, it goes back and forth and hits these things. And that is thought to be the beating out of time. Okay? That Shiva beats out the time of the universe. And why time? Well, time is related to destructiveness. As we know, time, destroys all things, right? Eventually, your time is up. You have all these sayings like this. Shiva is the one who beats out the time. Okay? And this thing over here is the Shiva Lingam. I'll talk about that in a second. Now, a great story about Shiva and the Hindu gods and goddesses. Tell the story. One day the gods they get together and decide, we should really make the elixir of immortality, which is called Amrita. We should make some Amrita. It's really hard to do, because to make the Amrita, what we have to do is we have to churn the Milky Way. Look up in the sky, you see the Milky Way. You don't see it around here because of all light pollution. The Milky Way is the galaxy. We could just churn that. We could make Amrita, the nectar of immortality. But the gods realize, well, we can't do this alone. Too much. We've got to go to the Rakshas. Rakshas are demons, and get them to help us, because there's not enough of us. So they go to the demons and they say, all right, we don't like you guys, you don't like us, but here's the deal. If we work together, we can make this nectar of immortality. So the demons agree, and they take the great Naga, snake, and they wrap around the Milky Way, and they pull back and forth. They churn it like butter, churning butter. They pull back and forth. And while they're churning the Milky Way, all these magical things, beings and unicorns and things come out of this, all these good things. And eventually, the Amrita comes out. Okay? And of course, what do you expect happens? The demons and the gods fight over this, right? Okay. The gods eventually win or whatever. But that's not important. What's important is you get the Amrita, the nectar of immortality, but if you get the nectar of immortality, the good stuff, what also must you get? The bad stuff. And what's the bad stuff? The worst possible, most intense, strongest, horrible poison you could ever imagine. Most destructive substance ever known also comes out. I mean, imagine like, a milkshake made of plutonium and, the worst, poison you can imagine all mixed up together. Now the stuff is everywhere. What do we do with it? And then, oh my God, we got to deal with this stuff. I don't know what to do with this poison. This is really bad. And so, Shiva, it looks like this is your job. You're in charge of all the destructive stuff, so deal with it. So Shiva takes this horrible poison and drinks it. But he doesn't swallow it because it'll kill him. He holds it in his throat. And it's burning his throat. Which is why when you see Shiva, statues of Shiva, depictions of Shiva, you will see these 3 marks on his neck. That's from him holding the poison in his throat. So he's holding the poison in his throat. How can he deal with this stuff? How can he deal with it? It's killing him, it's burning him. He can't swallow it, he can't spit it out. How to deal with this horrible, destructive stuff. Kali sees him, his wife Parvati emanates as Kali, who's the wrathful form of Parvati. We're going to talk about her in a minute. She sees him and she says, I have to help him. So what Shiva does is he transforms into a baby, and then Kali breastfeeds him. And the mother's milk neutralizes the poison. So what's the moral of the story? Whatever the worst thing, the worst poison, the most horrible stuff in the world can be neutralized by mother's love. It's kind of a nice story. So, say nice things to your mom. Be nice to your mom. Now, she was often depicted in hermaphroditic form. Well, this is very interesting, and this is the idea that, that again, we talked about Jung and the anima and the animus, that we both have feminine and masculine aspects to ourselves. Okay, we have feminine, regardless of what your gender is, you have feminine and masculine energies, in your body, in your mind. And so again, Shiva sometimes represents this. You see this androgynous version of Shiva here. And this is the Shiva Lingam. The lingam is a symbolic representation of the male sexual organs. And the base of this is the yoni, which is a symbolic representation of the female sexual organs. And so again, you can think of this in a prurient way. This is all about sex, or you can think of it in the symbolic way, which is that, again, this is the infusion of the male and female energies coming together in the human being. Okay? But we all have these energies. Okay? And these energies can come together and then further enhance our spirituality. Yes?
Don't they sell those things in stores to put rings on?
They sell them all over the world. Yeah, absolutely. Any place there's Hindus, you find these. Okay? Here's a big one. If you go to a village, this is what you're likely to see, and people go up and they adorn the Shiva Lingam. They'll put stuff on it, flowers, and this is very typical. Okay? And if you go to a Shiva temple and you're doing a Shiva puja, what you will probably do is pour milk on this thing, and then it will run out the base, this thing. And again, if you think there's some sexual symbolism in that, it's pretty hard to ignore. There's another Shiva Lingam with the yoni base. And the one you know, because you've watched Indiana Jones, and I can't remember which one this thing is, the second one or whatever, there's a wonderful lingam. Of course, this is the thing, they have to get this thing, right, from the bad guys or whatever. So this is in the movie again. Probably the most popular Shiva lingam representation in the West. Of course, you can tell the Hollywood part of it because they've added skulls to it. And they put the 3 marks on the lingam, which is interesting. All right. Let's start talking about the women. Feminine energy is called Shakti, and it literally means power. We don't talk about the male energy very much, but we talk about the female energy because in Hinduism, the female energy tends to be more active and the male energy tends to be more passive. This is the opposite of the stereotype in the West. Stereotype in the West, the guys who go out and do everything and they're active, and the woman just basically stays at home, and doesn't do much, right? It's opposite in Hinduism. The women are the active and the men are the passive. So let's talk about the goddesses, the consorts. Saraswati, the wife of Brahma. She is the muse to creative people and intellectuals. She's one of the oldest goddesses. She's widely worshipped by musicians and other performers as well as students who invite her to dance on their tongue before performance or recitation. So if I call on you and you're nervous, you invite Saraswati to dance on your tongue and you'll talk and you'll be brilliant. You'll be a silver-tongued devil, as the Irish would say, and you'll be brilliant. Okay? Her dress is white in color. It's the kind of color of pureness, pure illumination. In her forehand, she has a book symbolizing her mastery of intellectual knowledge. She's the patron saint of students. A rosary showing her spiritual mastery. And in her other 2 hands, she holds a veena. And veena is this instrument which creates the primordial sound. Primordial sound is, of course, Om, right? The veena makes this Now, if you know about the veena, you may know the veena from its more modern evolution into something, an instrument called the sitar. And you guys know what a sitar is? Mm-hmm. And you all know about this because George Harrison played one. And then he brought his friend over, Ravi Shankar, who became very famous in the 60s. He played at Woodstock and Monterey Pop Festival and places like this. And so Indian music was really brought over to the United States by the Beatles, brought to the West by the Beatles, because they became interested in this stuff and became somewhat popular in the 60s and the 70s. And again, also because you have lots of Hindus living around here. There are lots of modern people from India who enjoy Indian classical music. And there's 2 traditions in Indian music, classical traditions. There is the North Indian classical tradition, which has influence from the Islamic world, and there is the South Indian tradition called Carnatic music. And they're wonderful. And again, if we had time in this class, I think I put up on the website some lectures by Dr. Ted Lucas, who used to come in this class before he retired, and give you all a lecture about Indian music. So I taped his lecture and I put it up on the website for you to listen to. So I encourage you to listen to that. And I think I have some examples of Indian music to play for you on there, and also some kirtan, some sacred music kind of things, and I encourage you guys to listen to that. Also some Indian popular music. There's a whole popular music genre in India, a couple different popular genres. It's been influenced by the West. India also has one of the largest film industries in the world, and so they make lots of movies, and you may have seen some of these so-called Bollywood movies, and there's lots of music and singing and dancing and everything, and you'll generally find the sitar playing a big role in that. Now, the interesting thing about the veena is the veena leads to the sitar. Okay? The sitar is a very important instrument. The sitar is taken up by Islamic countries like Iran, Iraq, eventually Turkey. And in Turkey, it becomes something called the oud, or the balama, also known as the saz. And these instruments then, therefore, eventually make their way to Europe, and they become the lute, and the lute becomes the guitar. So if you want to think of the veena is the ancient ancestor to the guitar. So every time I pull my electric guitar out, I think this thing has its roots with Saraswati, playing the veena. And the veena is a beautiful instrument. There's also a slide version of the veena. If you guys like slide guitar, there's actually slide veena players. I took Indian music theory when I was in college, and my teacher was a vocalist, Indian vocalist, and there's a vocal tradition as well, but his teacher was actually one of the world-famous slide vina players. So he played slide vina, and it was this amazing sound. I mean, 1 minute it would sound like it was down from the delta of Mississippi, playing this beautiful slide blues stuff, and then it would go off in some Indian thing. It was this coolest instrument I'd ever heard in my life. I still have I actually have the vinyl record somewhere in this guy. That was amazing stuff. So it's a really cool instrument. I think I can give you an example of this. So here's a guy, this Bala Chandra guy, is one of the preeminent Veena players, was one of the preeminent Veena players. Well, I think he's dead now. List a little bit. If I start listening to it, I'll just get hypnotized and just let it go. Again, I encourage you to listen to Dr. Lucas' lecture. You can learn about the structure of Indian music. It's really quite interesting and really quite distinct from Western music. It's really fascinating. And it's a whole nother musical world, if you've never listened to this stuff before, that you can get into if you like music. It's really, really incredible stuff. I mean, I just can't tell you how much I just love it. That's all Saraswati. Lakshmi. She is the wife of Vishnu and known as the goddess of wealth. She wears a red sari and is depicted emanating coins from her hands. She symbolizes prosperity, health, and a harmonious family life. She's essentially the goddess of the hearth. She's the one who takes care of the family. Holding a lotus flower indicates a necessity of spiritual life. She's extremely compassionate and caring for those who fall in hard times. She's so kind that she often intercedes for those who've angered her husband. Vishnu gets pissed off, she intercedes. In this way, she's kind of similar to the Virgin Mary in Christianity and Catholicism, that you don't go directly to God, because God may be in a bad mood. So you go to the Virgin Mary, and she intercedes to God for you on your behalf. And so she's similar in that way. Also, the elephants here, the white elephants, symbol of fertility. Again, I'll draw the obvious Freudian conclusion from that. But she's also widely worshipped. And again, when Vishnu incarnates as a human being, then Lakshmi also incarnates. So when Vishnu comes down to earth and lives as Rama, Lakshmi comes with him and incarnates as Sita. And again, there are great stories about this, and of course one of the great story cycles in Hindu literature is the Ramayana. Yana is the vehicle, Rama is the way of Rama. And this depicts Rama's life, and the story centers around Sita is kidnapped by the evil Rakshasas, and Rama has to go and find her and retrieve her, and so he elicits the help of his friends, Garuda, the vulture god, the winged god, and his other friend who you may have heard of, Hanuman. Hanuman is the monkey god. And Hanuman, of course, is a great representation of the trickster archetype. He's the tricky monkey. And eventually what happens is Hanuman finds Rama held prisoner by the Rakshasas, by the demons, on the island of Sri Lanka. And he's able to sneak in because he's sneaky, and he's able to spirit, and then they have a war, Rama and the Rakshasas, they fight at this huge war, but during the war, Hanuman, being sneaky, sneaks in and spirits Rama out, spirits Sita away and gets her out, and then bring her back, and then she's reunited with Rama. And you think, oh, that's a great story in the world. But then the real story, what happens is that now the order has been broken, right? She's been held by these demons and presumably well raped by them, and to some degree, Vishnu shuns her a little bit. Okay, so this is the part that doesn't usually get reported because it's not the nice story part of it. He shuns her a little bit because she's been raped, and what she does is she, or at least he thinks she's been raped, and she exhorts him and says, how can you treat me this way? I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm pure at heart, and all this kind of stuff. And that's also part of the story, but you won't hear that part of the story. But it's a really good story. I recommend you if you get a chance to read it, Ramayana. It's really worth a read. There's lots of depictions of this. There's a really long Indian films of this. There's I think a television production of it. You can go find plays of it. You go up to Mount Madonna in Santa Cruz. They put on a version of the Ramayana. I think they do it every year. You find people doing theater versions of this stuff. It's a really cool thing to watch. Now we'll get to Parvati, and she's Shiva's wife. I told you a little bit about her already, the mother of Ganesha. And Skanda is the other name for Kartikenya, the god of war. And as a young girl, she practiced austerities in the mountains to win the affection of Shiva. She's kind of obsessed with Shiva, infatuated with him, so she practiced austerities to win his affection. And Parvati swears not to move until Shiva agrees to marry her. Now, Shiva was not interested in getting married. He was a widower. Why was he a widower? Because, remember I told you like to go off in the woods and meditate? Well, his first wife really didn't like this. Her name was Sati. And she would go off in the woods and meditate, and Sati would complain, oh, you're ignoring me, you're ignoring me. And eventually this upset her so much that she throws herself into a fire and kills herself. And Shiva was very, very upset about this, so much so that he took Sati's body, he'd wander around the country, and he'd take pieces of her body and cast them off in different places. And any place a piece of Sati's body landed, that place would become a Shiva temple. So as you can imagine, he probably wasn't too thrilled about getting married again. He figured, I'm not the marrying type. I really just want to go out in the forest and meditate. Any woman who marries me is going to be, pissed off that I'm not giving her enough attention. So I don't really want to get married. So what Shiva does is, and again, you can think of the story of Sati being carried around by Shiva and parts of her body being thrown in different places as symbolizes the cosmic soul being cast into the world. Again, it's one of these ideas here. So Shiva decides to test Parvati. Well, she said she won't move, but I'll make her move. So he sends ants, bad weather, etc., to get her to try to move from her spot, and nothing can dissuade her. She will not move. And she was getting worried. Oh, God, I might have to marry her. But finally he comes up with an idea that he knows will get her. He goes into the woods and he makes the voice of a small child out in the woods. You know, help me, I'm a little kid, help me. You know, or crying. Wah. And Parvati hears this. And she can't help it. She can't help it. There's a child in the woods, it's lost. And that's what gets her to move. She has to go help the child. She can't resist going and helping the child. Okay. And she gets the child turns into Shiva. But this melts Shiva's heart, and it demonstrates that she would only give up her love for him in order to help people, to help those who are powerless, like a little child. And this melts his heart, and it makes him, he changes his mind, and he marries her. And symbolically, this means the way back to God is through self-sacrifice and helping the helpless. Again, there's a moral message there. Now, Parvati is this peaceful, wonderful, beautiful woman, but she also manifests in two increasingly wrathful forms. Okay? Increasingly wrathful forms. Because sometimes, put it in the vernacular, you got to get pissed off to get things done. You know what I'm talking about? Everything is good, everything's nice. Oh yeah, just kind of let it slide, you know, yeah, whatever. But when you get pissed off, that's when you get active and you make things happen. And in Hinduism, that is considered to be a feminine energy. That is a Shakti. Okay? So Durga is the first wrathful. She's sort of semi-wrathful. She gets pretty wrathful too. And you see her here. She's carrying all these different weapons. She's also carrying a Shiva trident, bow and arrow, this mace thing, which these things with a ball and the end of a stick would have like razor sharp stuff on it. And she's got a sword. It's got that fidget spinner disc which you throw at people, which is razor sharp. Imagine a razor sharp fidget spinner, throw it at people like a ninja star, you know, kind of thing. And she's riding a lion, which is like the, you know, the victorious roar, and she would go and take care of business. Okay? And she could also emanate as a sort of demonic character as well. And you see in this picture, here she is over here in her Durga form. But then what she does is, there are all these demons over here, and so she emanates as this really incredibly nasty demonic form and goes and takes care of business. And all these demons, by the way, in this picture represent the kind of, you know, typical things: hatred, greed, depression, sloth, conceit, ignorance, etc., in personified demonic form. And she goes out and slays all these. Okay? And again, this can represent a cleansing of our karma. Yes?
So she's carrying a lotus, so she like, with purity in mind, slaughtering everything?
Yes, absolutely. So every time you see the lotus, you think of purity. Okay, the lotus is a plant, rises from the mud, rises from the muck and the crap on the bottom, but comes up and it becomes pure. And so this idea of the lotus is that represents the, you know, that our journey is to become more pure, that we can become more pure. Okay, and so that's what we're shooting for. So here she is manifesting in her extra wrathful form. But we have another version of Parvati, which is Kali. And Kali is the ultimate badass. Okay? She's typically depicted as dark in color, and again, the word Kali related to Kala. Kala can be time, but also can be dark. Okay? And she's depicted usually naked, wearing a necklace of severed heads and skulls and a belt of severed arms. She has a number of formidable weapons, and she doesn't look afraid to use them. Her tongue is stuck out as far as it can go, and sometimes her eyes are bulging. Her symbolism is not so much related to anger, but instead she's seen as the remover of duality. This idea of duality, one thing that keeps us from realizing godhood, is that this us and them kind of thing. You know, there's always this sort of subject-object kind of thing. But to really become enlightened, you see the oneness of the subject and object. You stop seeing things as, you know, subject and object, I and thou, you know, get through that duality. And that is an aspect of enlightenment. And she represents that. And the idea is that she shocks you into that. At the same time, she uses her tongue to suck up negative energy. She's shown making the mudra of Do not be afraid, and I will protect you. Remember we talked about mudras, the hand signs? So here we see the hand signs. These are the simple ones, right? Basically this. Don't worry, I'll protect you. Okay. She's the ultimate grizzly mom, right? Ultimate grizzly mom. Really, grizzly moms have to be super tough because who's trying to eat their children? There's the male grizzly bears trying to eat their children, right? You guys know, we talked about this, right? About bears? It's at the other class, I can't remember.
The other class.
The other class, right? You know how grizzly bears are? Why are grizzly moms so tough? Because there's a lot of infanticide among grizzly bears that the male bears will come and kill the cub, and then that will cause the female grizzly bear to go into heat, and he can then mate with her, and then she'll have his babies. So there's this infanticide. By the way, that also happens in primates. So female grizzly bears have evolved to be really big and super aggressive in order to protect their children, protect their cubs. Okay. And Kali is a version of that. She is the mom who fiercely protects her children, which is all of us, human beings, all of her followers, all of us humans. Okay? So she manifests in this really wrathful way, not to scare us, but to protect us. Followers who have a vision of Kali describe it as an ecstatic experience. So there's a typo there. She's often depicted as dancing on a prostrate Shiva who is very passive, sometimes gazing lovingly up at her, but he's very passive. And again, this idea that the male is very passive, the female is active, and the male is very passive. She's the TCB, to quote Elvis. TCB, taking care of business, right? Elvis came up with taking care of business. He had a little thing on his karate gi and thunderbolt. But she takes care of business. It's the females who take care of the business. Okay. She's depicted in many different forms. The Western name Kelly. Anybody in here named Kelly? So Kelly, supposedly, I read this, comes from Kali. And it's thought that Kali worship came up through Europe as a pagan worship of the goddess. Came up, migrated from India up into Europe, the Middle East up into Europe, and eventually made its way to the Celtic peoples in Ireland and Scotland. And they worshiped the goddess. Yeah, her name was Kelly, and that's where the word Kelly, name Kelly comes from. So again, another representation of Shiva here. Very passive, giving up at Kali. The severed heads representing the cutting off of the ego. Okay. Egoistic thinking. The Rig Veda, there's a hymn called the Hymn to the Night, the Ratri Sutra. Sorry, I think I got the spelling wrong. Night means that activity has come to rest. Night is absolute and represents the destruction and the power of Kala, time. Kali's name perhaps derived from this word itself. It's also the Sanskrit word for black or dark. So she's therefore the timeless dark night. And the word Ratri, night, is derived from the root Ra, to give, and is taken to mean the giver of bliss, the peace of happiness. So Kali is one who gives, right? She takes care of her followers, like a mother, sometimes called the Great Mother by her followers. So I have just a little time. I'm going to talk more about Kali. I'll talk about Tara and Chinnamasta, and I think I'll say that for next time. I'll tell you a little story about when I went to a Kali temple, and this will give you an idea about the inconsistencies among Hindu practice. So this was way back in the day. I was traveling through India. I went from India, I went to Nepal, which, by the way, is a wonderful place. I highly recommend you go there. And decided one day to go outside of, I was in Kathmandu, Nepal, and decided to go outside along the road a few miles on the road toward like Mount Everest. We didn't get to Mount Everest, but we went on the road toward it and went to this temple outside of town, outside of Kathmandu. And I came to this temple, and it was the most amazing pagan thing I'd ever seen. There were Brahmin priests sitting in the front of the temple with incense burning, chanting mantras, while another Brahmin priest was taking goats, taking a curved knife, pulling the goat's head back, and quickly slicing the goat's neck. at which point blood would spurt out all over the place. They would then quickly hand the goat off to some people in the butcher caste. They would chop the goat up, giant pot of goat stew, and they would hand out goat stew to anybody who came by. The goat stew, by the way, was delicious. In the meantime, there's all this blood all over the place, and the moms would come with the little babies, little kids, take the kids, put their hands in the blood, and then go to the Kali statue, which is in the wall, the relief statue in the wall, and rub the blood, take the little kid's hand and rub the blood in the statue for good luck. That, my friends, was a Hindu temple. Goats were being sacrificed. Blood was being smeared on things. Okay? It was a Kali temple. On the hill above the Kali temple was a Parvati temple. Parvati temple, everybody was vegetarian. There was no blood. It was really beautiful. It was all the typical Hindu stuff. You came in, they put a nice dot on your forehead, and you could sit there and worship the nice, calm Parvati. Okay? But those two female deities are connected, right? The wrathful form, the active form, and the more mellow form. Right? You see that thing. I never saw that in India, but I saw that outside of Kathmandu. And that was a real full-on Hindu temple, and they were eating goat. They were slaughtering the goats, eating them right there, and smearing the blood on things. So again, ahimsa for most Hindus. You don't kill animals. Most Hindus are vegetarians, but not all.